Okay, well, I gave you something to think about last week here. We talked about deliberately sinning. So this is where we're going to pick it up. Pick it up from verse 26 of chapter 10. It says, if we deliberately keep on sinning after we have received the knowledge of the truth, no sacrifice for sins is left, but only a fearful expectation of judgment and of raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. So this is kind of one of the wake-up calls that Hebrews. Now Hebrews, the author, has been pretty good so far. I mean, he hasn't really thrown a whole lot of fire and brimstone at us up until this point here. But he reminds us that we have to keep our mind set. Remember, we talked about unswervingly. We don't want to swerve to the right or to the left. We want to continue to go straight ahead. Not that we won't, once in a while hit the curb, but to hurry up, bring it back and correct it. I have a new feature on my RAV4 now. We just got it, and it's got this feature that it looks at the lines in the road, and if you swerve over, it'll start beeping at you and actually correct the car. The gentle correction to keep you going straight, unless you put your turn signal on and then it knows. So it's actually kind of a real lesson in what this is. Sometimes we start going over in life and we go over near the line, and God kind of rings the bell and brings us back again so that we continue to go straight. And but we still need to take a look and break this down a little bit. If we deliberately keep on sinning after we've received knowledge of the truth. Now, I think that this is not really somebody who makes mistakes, but this is an attitude that we have. When we start approving of sin, and we start making excuses for sin, what we're doing is we are diminishing the work of Christ, who came here to free us from sin. So if we continue deliberately to sin after he made his ultimate sacrifice, then what he's saying is there's no other sacrifice. There's nothing left. This is God's plan. This is God's sacrifice. So if you continue to ignore it and think something better is on the way, there isn't. So better get on board now. The only thing you have is a fearful expectation of judgment and raging fire that will consume the enemies of God. References to hellfire. We don't know exactly what that is, but we know it can't be good. And if you ever burn your... I was thinking about this, and I think that fire is probably the most painful thing that you can experience. To burn yourself. I mean, I've cut myself before, but when you burn yourself, for me in my body, that's the most painful thing, because it lasts as well. It doesn't go very away quickly. Your body blisters, and it's just not a very pleasant thing. So I think that's why he uses this as a reference. Anyone who rejected the law, now he takes us back to the Old Testament. Remember, that's what he does. He's trying to keep us balanced between the Old and the New. Anyone who rejected the law of Moses died without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. So if you committed a crime, if you did something on the Sabbath that you weren't supposed to do, or if you killed somebody, or if you stole, or whatever you did, if the punishment for it was death, you would be put to death by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. And if that's true, how much more severely do you think someone deserves to be punished who's trampled on the Son of God underfoot, who's treated as an unholy thing, the blood of the covenant that sanctified them, and who has insulted the Spirit of grace? So here he's making the comparison. Look at the law and how the law worked. Now, if you broke the law, you paid the punishment very quickly. There was no, spend a year or 2 in jail before we finally get you out to trial. It was done very quickly. And then so was the punishment done very quickly. And that was if you broke the law. But here we have the very Son of God, the nature of God embedded in humanity, and if we disobey that, that's got to be much more serious than the law. And so he's making that comparison here. And he's saying that it is, in fact, insults the Spirit of grace. Now, a lot of times we kind of do, not we, but a lot of times I kind of hear that. I hear that from people when they're not really thinking, hopefully. But they'll make comments like, well, you know I sinned, but God is a graceful God. Wait a second here. Okay, I understand, yes, you are right. However, the problem here is that are we trying to take advantage of the Spirit of grace? Because, and Paul makes this very clear, that if we continue to sin, we are not lying, but we are going against, conflicting with the Spirit of God's grace. Should we continue to sin because God is a graceful God? Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not, he tells us. And that's the attitude we ought to have. And this is the attitude we've talked about, repentance. Where repentance, we've always thought, for Bob and Deborah, that they weren't here when we talked about it, but we've kind of been misled a little bit about the word repentance into thinking that it always only refers to sin. You repent for sin. But the word actually doesn't mean that. The word actually means to change one's mind. And in many contexts it's speaking about sin. But there is a larger context that I think is extremely important that we don't want to miss, and it's got to do with our whole frame of life. We now live in a repentant state of mind because we are knowledgeable about the kingdom of God. And that creates a whole new context of our life. So we live in a repentant state, in a new state where it all fits together with newness of mind, the mind of Christ. So we want to keep that in mind. For we know him who said, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay." And again, the Lord will judge his people. It's a dreadful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Now, we kind of sometimes lost that fear of God.
I was going to say, we take that for granted.
Yeah, we kind of focus on the God of grace. But sometimes God reminds us, and we'll see that a little bit more today, reminds us that God is not a wimp, and he's not gullible. And we're not going to put one over on God. And just imagine eternity. Just the idea of eternity scares me. That I might spend it in eternal damnation. I mean, maybe it'll be flames of fire, or maybe it'll be just isolation. But whatever it is, it's going to be for eternity. And you're not going to be able to say, man, if I knew this, I would have done something different, so I'm going to change my mind. You don't have an opportunity to do it again. So we got to get it right this time. And so that is a fearful thing for me. So that's how God kind of keeps it balanced in my life, the idea of eternity. Remember those earlier days after you had received the light, the gospel that he's talking about, when you endured a great conflict full of suffering. Sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult and persecution. At other times you stood side by side with those who were so treated. You suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property, because you knew that you yourselves had better and lasting possessions. So do not throw away your confidence, it will be richly rewarded. Now, this is a wonderful paragraph right here. We could take a lot out of it. He's speaking about his audience, and he's saying sometimes you were publicly exposed to insult. and persecution. So these were not people who were sitting in luxury, you know, enjoying Christianity, going to church on Sunday and having Christmas parties and stuff. No, these were people who had to do a lot of this in secret. And when they found out, they were punished and persecuted. But you, as a church, you stood side by side with these people. You didn't push them away, or you weren't afraid to be part of them. You comforted them side by side who were treated that way. And you suffered along with those in prison and joyfully accepted the confiscation of your property. So just think for a moment how you would feel if things changed, and maybe they are changing in our society, where all of a sudden the police came in and said, well, I'm sorry, but we're confiscating everything you own. We're kicking you out of your house because it shows you're a Christian. And so the state has decided to confiscate your property. How would you feel about that? Everything you've had is gone. And that's their situation. That's what happened to them. Everything they had was taken away. And he speaks that they joyfully accepted it. Why? Because their values were no longer in the worldly things. Their values were focused on something else. That's what they were living for. They weren't living for the day. And this made me think, maybe a wonder that, do we hear this message today? Blessed are those who are poor in spirit. You know, or do we hear the message that Christianity means you have to be successful, and it means you have to be wealthy. And what were some of the other things? I put a couple of other things down here. Successful and wealthy and healthy and fame. All these things are Christianity. That's what we're searching for. But when we read scriptures, that's not what we hear. That's not the message that we hear. It's about how to be happy when you're poor. But we don't hear that message anymore. I don't hear it anywhere.
I did yesterday in church.
Did you?
I did.
Oh, absolutely. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Be careful about it, because this is really the focus. The focus is not on possessions. The focus is in this case, their sign was that their property was confiscated. And this was, as we'll see, a test. And we're going to talk about being tested. So it kind of will play all together here.
Well, I think the test is very real. I mean, if you just simply ask yourself right now, what would I do if I went home and it's gone, somebody says it's now mine,
Yeah.
I would not be happy with that at all.
Somebody else was living in your house.
I would not accept that graciously.
Right.
And
And
so
I think that's the challenge.
no, that is a challenge. My mindset is right with everybody else.
And that's great, because we have to admit to that. We have to accept that.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
And then move on from there and see how do we retune ourselves in case that does happen. And we can kind of see, occasionally anyway, a shifting of the state and the attitude of the state towards Christianity. We can see a shifting of it. Not that it's not going to shift back, but I'm saying right now we can kind of see the law is now taking a different attitude towards Christianity.
Absolutely.
You think it will shift back?
I don't know.
I personally do not, but there may be some shifting and then another shift. I think it's all going to get worse. I think Revelation talks about it all going to get worse. There may be shifting back and forth for a little while, but I think eventually.
Well, we know where the end road is going to lead.
Well, that's my point, Bob. Yeah, we know where the end road is going to lead. So I think it's best to prepare for that now.
But I find Christians nowadays don't tend to stand up for their beliefs, and they live their beliefs probably, but they do it privately, and somewhat they help others and do that, but they don't stand up for what they think is wrong out there.
Yes.
They just sort of say, well, that's the way they think, and they let it go at that.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be so accepting
Yeah.
or tolerant.
Tolerant.
That's
yeah.
the word.
Tolerant.
And we have. Well, I think that we have to separate ourselves from the world. And for me, it's not that I tolerate the world. I just let the world do what it does. Okay, I'm not, and the church is a whole other thing for me. The church needs to be on board. They need to be, as you said, stand up for what is right. The world, well, we know they're going. We know where they're going, and we know the direction that they're going. And it's a mistake, actually, to try to comfort the world into thinking it's going to be okay. You can still live that life, and God will still accept you.
No.
Oh, I agree
We
with
cannot, we cannot comfort the world into thinking that way. The world needs to discover for itself its evil, its evilness. So we got to be careful we don't try to make evil look good.
Well, I agree with that, but on the other hand, don't you think we also are supposed to be out there preaching the gospel?
Yes, preaching the gospel, but not preaching that if you
Don't change.
if you don't have to change, you'll be okay.
I know.
Yeah, so we want to
We
be
have to
careful.
change.
The gospel, absolutely. Yeah. So do not throw away your confidence; it will be richly rewarded. So how is and this is where it gets tricky. You will be richly rewarded, and so it's so easy to say, richly rewarded, fame, profit,
No.
success.
No. Absolutely not.
No.
But people,
No.
some people would interpret that.
Well,
You see
you
how
might
easy
say
it
it's
would be to
right.
slip into that with this last statement that you made. But what is he speaking about here?
In heaven.
Heaven. He's speaking about the ultimate destiny, which is where our minds need to be. Thinking about the ultimate destiny, the eternal destiny. And when we put our mind on that, then
That's
our
your-
possessions,
That's your reward.
yeah, that is our
Correct.
reward. Not what we have, not our possessions, not our fame, none of these temporary things.
Not
So-
worldly things.
Yeah, we need to be very careful. What was that?
I said not worldly things.
Right, not the worldly
Right.
things.
That's a good way of putting it, yeah.
Okay. You need to preserve, or you need to persevere, so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what He has promised. So now He clarifies it. So you have to be careful you don't stop with that previous sentence. You
Correct.
need to read down one more sentence, and He says you need to persevere, continue through the struggle, so that when you have done the will of God, so that's what He's speaking about, doing the will of God. You will receive what He has promised. Now this is a key word here. He's going to take this now and develop this whole idea of a promise, God's promises in chapter 11.
Another covenant.
Yeah. For in just a little while, He who is coming will come and will not delay. And by my righteous one will live by faith. But my righteous one will live by faith, and I take no pleasure in the one who shrinks back. So, the Christian is always expecting the coming immediately. As in a short time, in a little while. But the coming is also an unfolding. It's a continual process of coming. So we experience the coming day by day. The ultimate coming is going to be an event, but still the coming has begun. So we are experiencing it now. But we do not belong to those who shrink back and are destroyed, but to those who have faith and are saved. So now he's going to start talking about faith, and this is going to be very interesting here. So we will go back and get to 11. Sorry.
I like that word, I take no pleasure in. Using that phrase, I take no pleasure in.
Oh,
I think that's sort of mildly put.
yeah, a way to phrase
Yeah.
Very
it.
mild.
Yeah. Okay, faith in action. So now he shifts over and he's built his case and he's building it now to faith. and this is probably, we've heard stories and sermons and lessons about faith over and over again. So see if we can present something a little new, a little different way to look at faith. And if it is, let me know. Let me know if you've heard this before. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. So we have what some might call a definition, but this is not to be considered an analytical definition of faith, like you could put this in your dictionaries here. This is a kind of a spiritual. It's an inclination of what faith is and what it does. It's confidence in what we hope for. So, but let's just stop there and talk about that. Confidence in what we hope for. Did you think about faith like that, or do you think about faith differently? Do you think about faith as something that you hope for?
No. No.
You have to live faith.
What's that?
You have to live faith.
You have to live it. Yeah, we're going to talk about that too. Yeah, absolutely.
I think of faith as being something more tangible than what I'm hoping for.
Okay.
I have faith that God is real.
Okay.
That's tangible to me.
Okay.
I'm not hoping that He's real.
Okay.
To me, it's my truth.
It's your truth?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no unwavering.
So faith is truth. I mean, I don't mean, I'm not putting you on the spot.
No,
but I'm saying
I like.
faith
I
is
have
linked
that.
to truth. There's
Yeah.
but we'll see that not necessarily.
To me, it's in the truth in what not just faith is truth, but maybe the whole sentence or the most of the sentence in what I hope for is truth, I guess.
Okay. Now let's look at the second point. It's assurance or confidence about what we do not see.
I think that this first sentence is very important.
Mm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The idea he's attacking, he's presenting the idea of faith so that people can see it in a little bit of a different light. Maybe they've kind of wandered off in the idea of what faith is. But it's assurance about what we don't see. Did you ever think of faith in that regard? That you believe in things, but you can't see them.
Oh, absolutely. That is faith.
Okay, so the second part seems to be more acceptable than the first, or not acceptable, more understandable than the first part, or more applicable than the first. It's a little harder to understand confidence
Instead
about
of
what we
hope,
hope
I
for.
would say what we are looking forward to.
Okay.
And the assurance about what we do not see.
What does faith enable us to do? This is a tricky question, but I'm just kind of asking you.
Not
What,
fair.
what does faith allow you to do? Why did God give us the gift of faith? I mean, we're creatures that He created, and He gave us this gift, this ability to have faith, this ability to hope for something, to give us assurance, and to see something that, or believe in something that we can't see. Why did He do that?
Trusting God in your daily life.
Yeah.
Okay, trusting God in our daily life.
And believe what He says.
Excellent, believe what He said. And now, it enables me to see my life in the context of the future as well as the past. Without faith, I live in the present. But with faith, I can see the future and live according to the future because I believe it, I trust it as the things that
Well, you can proceed. You can go ahead.
Right. And it also helps us to reflect back upon things that happen and have faith, like in the resurrection. We have faith in the resurrection. Even though it's a historical event, we can't prove it, so we still have to rely on faith. But it allows us to live in the context of both the past and the present. So without faith, we're just taking one step at a time without reflecting on the past or anything in the future.
Oh, absolutely. I think if you don't have the kind of faith you're talking about, Bob, life is a day-to-day crapshoot.
Yes, it is. It really is. It's a drudgery. It's empty, and that's why so many people who don't have it wind up on things like drugs or gambling or alcohol. They do things because there is no hope. Without faith, you don't have any hope because there's nothing to hope for. And he's going to give us a list now of things in faith.
Is that?
Deborah wanted to say something.
Because I'm cheating, and I'm looking at a note from the first time we did Hebrews.
Yeah.
And the only reason this jumped out at me is because I've highlighted it and underlined it, and it's all bold. And you said this, without faith, no evidence will ever convince us. With faith, no evidence is needed.
Oh, I said that?
It's written right there, so I'm presuming yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I believe you.
So read that one more time,
Larry.
Okay.
so we can.
Without faith, no evidence will ever convince us.
Without faith, no evidence will convince
Will
us.
ever convince us.
Okay.
That's right. No, you can talk to your blue in the face
Right.
people.
With faith, no evidence is needed.
And with faith, no evidence is needed.
That's pretty profound.
Yes.
But it's very true.
It is very true.
I'm glad you wrote that down.
I'm glad I did too. Did you write it down too, Barb?
No, did you write it down or is it in the notes?
No, I wrote it down.
Oh, okay, no, I didn't write it down. But
So he's going to start paragraphs with this idea. By faith, he wants to try to teach us what he means here then. So it says, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. So who was here when God created the heavens and the earth? Anybody raise your hand?
No.
Now this is what he asks Job. He says, where were you when I created the heavens? Well, obviously there were no witnesses to it, so nobody saw it happen. Therefore, it fits under the category that we have assurance of what we do not see. That we believe God created the heavens and the earth. So that's an act of faith. By faith, Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. Remember Abel and Cain? And there was 2 offerings brought, and he accepted Abel's offering and rejected Cain's. And some people reading that say, well, that's a little unfair. I mean, Cain was doing the best he could. He gave the bounty of the land. But here in Hebrews, he shows us why one was accepted and one was not accepted. It's not apparent in the actual story. By faith, he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith, Abel still speaks, even though he is dead. So, one offering was accepted because it was given in faith, and the other was not. And that's why he gave Cain the warning. He says, evil's at the door. You be careful. You're at the threshold. And then he decided to go all the way in, and he killed his brother. Now, one of the things I want to bring up now, some of these things I want to bring up, but I'm not quite sure where to bring them up, so hopefully this will be the right timing. When we speak about faith, it's linked together with promises.
I'll be right with you, hold on. Yeah, I'm
Faith
just stepping outside.
in a promise of God. God makes a promise, and we have faith, which means we believe it. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is something that's been manipulated by many people, especially the cults. The idea that people say, well, you believe in the Bible by faith, right? And you believe in the resurrection by faith, right? Well, here, I've got a book. All you have to do is believe in this by faith. And so what do you say? I'm not sure what to say. This is what they'll say to you when they go door to door. If you let them in your home, they'll say to you, well, we're a body of faith, faithful believers. You believe in Jesus by faith. You believe in the Bible by faith. You believe in all these things by faith.
Yeah,
But faith is a promise. Faith is belief in a promise. This is a specific kind of faith. This is not blind faith. Okay, what were you going to say, Bob?
never mind.
Oh, okay. This is what we have is not blind faith. We have faith that's based on a promise. So let's look at the promise. Let's look at how this book. Does anybody know how this book came into existence?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, let me tell you the story for those who do not. The angel Moroni came down to Joseph Smith in New York State, led him to a lot, a piece of property, where these golden plates were buried. He gives up the golden plates. This is the 4 times he brings them home. They're written, but keep in mind, there is no biblical promise of this event. There is no promise that in the future golden plates will be found. So there is no promise associated with this fact. The second point, and there is no promise associated with Moroni. He finds these plates written in Reformed Egyptian. Surprise, there is no such language as Reformed Egyptian. There is no promise. There is no connection with reality here. The next promise is, how does he interpret these plates? He interprets these plates
In a language that doesn't exist.
from a language that doesn't exist. Do you know how he interpreted these plates? He put a special stone in his hat. And when he put it on his head, he was able to interpret Reformed Egyptian into English.
People believe this gibberish?
Well, this is the point. This is the point.
Many workers don't know that.
A whole
They
bunch
don't
of
know
them.
that.
If faith is just blind belief,
Uh-huh.
then they can convince you it's just as worthy as believing in Scripture.
No.
This is Scripture.
They're wacko.
This is Scripture for them because of this story. Because for them, faith is just blind belief. It's not based on a promise. And for naive Christians who think faith is faith, yeah, well, maybe I ought to believe in this then. What's the difference? No, Gabriel appears to Mary. Angels appeared in the Old Testament. Well, why is this so unbelievable then? Because there's no promise associated with this.
Do Mormons believe in the Old Testament?
Yes, they do.
So
They
they,
have a lot of different other characters
Yeah.
in there.
So,
Yes, they do.
You asked,
They believe in the whole Bible.
in
The Old
Mormons,
Testament.
Old Testament.
They believe in both the Old and New Testament.
so they believe in Christ?
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Christ
absolutely.
saves today.
He's one of the gods.
Say her name.
He's one of the gods that you can be.
You're gonna be
You
a
will
God.
be just like Jesus. You will be a God just like Jesus.
And
But
can
you see,
be your own planet, too.
the way that this is done is based upon the idea that faith is not built on a promise of God. Hebrews is going to teach us the right way to believe in faith.
So we're
well-
we taught we don't change the word of God. We don't add to it. We don't take away from it.
No.
We're very
We
careful
don't
with
need
it
anything
because our faith is based on seeking truth. Mine is based on seeking truth. I want the truth, and no matter how hard it is, no matter how difficult it is, this is the one chance I got to go through life, and then eternity is at stake. I want the truth. So when I get people presenting me this, I say to them, well, you show me the foundation of the truth here. And there is no foundation for truth here. So, and we got through Abel's story here. By faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So the primary thing here of faith is you have to first believe God exists. So this is religious faith. This is faith, truthful faith that we have as Christians. The primary thing is we have to first believe God exists. If we don't believe he exists, then everything else is not truthful. We believe the basis of truth is God and everything God speaks and says. So if God isn't there, then there is no truth.
I believe in that, but go back to the very first part of it, the faith that,
By Enoch?
yeah.
By faith, Enoch, do you remember the story of Enoch? Enoch was translated or taken. He didn't really taste of death in the same way that we do. We're not quite sure what that meant. But Enoch was translated into heaven without having to suffer death. And that's the story. He's going to go through the Old Testament and bring out some of these stories. He doesn't explain that one here. But he does not experience death. He could not be found. He just kind of disappeared. We don't know exactly what that means again. This could be a kind of a prophetic thing that happened, trying to reflect the idea of Christ being resurrected. But I don't want to go and say that because I just don't know. I don't know what it means.
But I thought Christ was the only one who was, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, when Christ was resurrected, this was he died, but without apparently experiencing death somehow. Again, this is beyond me.
Okay. Good. That makes me feel better.
Oh, okay.
Because it's
Yeah.
beyond me,
There's
too.
a lot of things beyond me, but this is definitely one of them. So without faith, it's impossible to please God, and we have to first come to the belief that He exists and that He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. And that's kind of the basis of our truth statement. That we believe in God, and we believe God is a just God. So there's justice with our God. And another one. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. And by his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So here now we have Noah. And again, I brought him up a little earlier that he didn't get the boat, didn't float down from heaven. He built it. But why did he build it? He built it based on a promise from God.
Faith.
Okay? And he built it out of faith. So it's not works. And so that's what we do too. In our lives, we work, we build things, we do things, but we must do them based upon the promise of God and our faith in that promise. Another one, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and he went. Even though he did not know where he was going, and by faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. There's our word, of the same promise. Abraham was promised. Abraham didn't wake up one day and say, you know, I think I'll go on a trip.
No.
I think I'll go down and start my own religion.
That's been done before.
But that's not what happened here. God gave Abraham a promise, and he acted on that promise. That's the main thing, emphasis I want to make today here, is that faith is based on promises. And he keeps repeating that and showing that. Based on the same promise, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So he was looking forward. He couldn't yet see it, but as the definition that the writer gave us, looking towards the future, towards this promise, he could see a city, but it wasn't yet built. But faith enabled him to still see the city, even though he never experienced it. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children, because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. Again, considered God faithful. So this is another connection. It's not just that God promises, it's that God promises. So you accent each word differently and you get the full picture. It's a promise by God, and the promise by God. God cannot lie. That's what, again, basis of our faith and religion is he cannot lie. He will not lie. He is absolute truth. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. So we believe everything is the truth connected to Jesus, connected to God. That's why we believe in it. Not because we have a need to have faith in anything, in something. So when people say, and sometimes people put down faith. They want to be analytical, mathematical. Okay, so they'll say, well, I'm too smart for faith. I usually ask them, why do you think you have the gift of faith then? Why are you ignoring? I mean, you have the gift of analysis. That's a good thing. But you also have the gift of faith. What if you use the gift of faith just as much as you do analysis? I mean, is this a mistake that you have the gift of faith and you shouldn't have it? Or are we supposed to use it and exercise the gift of faith?
Those are good questions.
Yeah, like what would someone respond back to you?
So far, they haven't really given me a good explanation. Because it's usually the first time they've heard it.
I think right there's the basis of why Christians try to do good things, because they do have faith.
Yeah.
So faith opens up a whole different kind of world.
It does open up a whole different kind of world. Absolutely right. Right. And it did for these people too in the Old Testament. Where did I stop? I'll read it.
Well,
And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, which was Abraham,
Right.
came descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. So from Abraham, who by analysis was certainly not a good choice of God, he should have picked a younger guy, but he picks his old Abraham, sends him on this journey, takes years and years, and then he promises his wife Sarah that she's going to have a baby, and she laughs about that, says, "Are you kidding? Look at my husband." And it happens because Abraham had faith. Abraham didn't wake up one morning and say, "You know, I think I'm going to take Isaac and offer him up to God and see whether God is real. See if he's going to
See if
come.
that works out or not.
See if this works." Right. He didn't do that. This is one of the main differences that we must understand about Adam and Abraham and what he did. God was testing him.
Right.
Now, we don't want to test. And I really gave this a lot of thought, but I get a little reflection from you guys. To be tested here, for me, means that our faith becomes reality. We can go through life thinking we have a lot of faith, but it's not until we are tested by reality. You think you can do this, but can you do this?
No, yeah.
I'm going to ask Abraham, you think you have a lot of faith. Well, I'm going to ask you to do something. And let's see if you really do have a lot of faith. And I think this is the context of New Testament, Old Testament
And that's me.
testing. Is, can your faith survive the reality check? So it's not like God is being unfair. God is being truthful. And if we want to be truthful, we want to see, is our faith really truthful? Is it real faith? And the only way we're going to know it is by the reality check. Now, isn't this what happened to Peter? When Peter was in the upper room and he said, "Lord, Lord, I've got faith better than all of these guys. I'm never going to deny you." So up here he had the faith. And he really believed he had the faith. I mean, I'm not going to discount it. He really believed he had it. But he was put to the reality test.
And denied him 3 times.
And he denied him 3 times. He failed the reality test.
That's really an amazing phrase. Can my faith survive the reality check?
Yeah. So we need to know where our faith is. It's not that God is being cruel and he wants to kick us in the butt. He's trying to say, look, I know you believe this. I know you believe this. But you've got to see for yourself where your faith really is so that you can do something about it.
Isn't there a phrase somewhere in the Bible that said, "Lord, I believe, help my unbelief"?
Oh, that was actually Augustine who said that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. So,
We're going to have our faith tested soon when self-driving cars come. When self-driving cars, you get in this car, they're not even going to have a steering wheel. You sit there and says, "I want to go to Sacramento."
Yeah.
That'll never be in my lifetime for me personally. I'm making that statement right
Yeah.
now. It's not
It's
happening.
not mine.
Have you ever sat down with a Jewish person and ever discussed any of this, Bob? I mean, I just,
No, in one quick way. Not that I can remember. Maybe many years ago we had some discussion. By that time I wasn't prepared.
I just have such a hard time understanding with volume after volume after volume of this message,
Yeah.
how they didn't get the rest of the message. I mean, it really is a
Well, some of them
hang
are.
up with me.
Okay, some
We've
of
been
them
worried about
are.
that for years.
One of our Jewish.
I know.
Yeah, one of our Jewish friends, I discovered that a lot of times they're misinformed about Christianity. They think that we believe in three gods. They're taught that we believe in three gods, so stay away from Christians. They believe in three gods. This is, misinformation.
So they don't believe in the Trinity.
Yeah, so a lot of times, you don't preach the Trinity. You preach the gospel. Don't take it head on. Don't try to convince them of those things yet. Give them the gospel. That's what we're supposed to. We're not supposed to be theologians. We're supposed to deliver the gospel. God will take care of the rest of it. So, if you do confront them. But then one of the best things and the easiest thing to do is just ask them, read the book of Hebrews. Just read the book of Hebrews.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Don't even read the Gospels yet. Just start here.
Right.
And then come and ask me questions. That would be one way to do it. Now it says all these people were still living by faith when they died. So they lived by faith up until the time they died. And they did not receive the things that were promised. See, Abraham never received his city of God. He never walked into Jerusalem. Moses didn't walk into Jerusalem. So this is what he's saying. He said they continued to believe even though they did not receive it. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, from the future. Remember we were saying that it enables us to see into the future. So Abraham could see into the future what was going to be there. Admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return.
Right.
So what he's saying is their focus was where they were going on their faith.
Yeah.
Their faith journey, I think we use the term today, their faith journey. Where are we going? Not looking back like Lot's wife and saying, well, yeah, but where did I come from? And do I have the options to back out and go back again? Can I get unbaptized? And that's, I think, what he's saying here. You don't really have, if you're in faith, you don't have the option to go back. You don't want the option to
You
go
don't
back.
want the other. I think that's the better.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. Okay, boy, I'm far behind in my notes here.
You'll get there.
Yeah. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, see, this is why I wanted to make sure we talked about faith. What was God? How did God test him? He tested his reality. I want you to see if you really believe in me. I want you to see it because I think God already knew how much faith Abraham had. So it wasn't for God's benefit he did this.
For Abraham.
It was for Abraham's benefit he tested him. He offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son. Okay, even though God had said to them, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." So here's the difficulty for Abraham, the paradox. God promised me that I was going to have children, and children and children, as many as the sands on the beach or as the stars in the sky. And now he's telling me to offer the very means by which he's going to give me my children. What do I do? He didn't think about it.
No, he didn't.
And if you read it carefully, you'll find there was no discussion for Abraham. He believed God. And now this is a verse here that popped out at me too. The very next one. Abraham reasoned that God could even raise the dead. And so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. Now many people think that Abraham did this, or I should say I've heard from some people, that Abraham did this knowing God was not going to let him take his son.
Oh,
No.
Oh, I don't believe that.
that's elite.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and some people today get in the same situation when they withhold drugs from their children, and they say, well, God's really not going to take him. But that wasn't what on Abraham's mind. Abraham truly believed God was going to take him. He was going to die. And then somehow God was going to give him his son back again.
Yeah, I think that's what.
That's the crux of the paradox here. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a paradox. It would be Abraham making believe because he knew God was going to save him. He didn't know that.
Mm-mm. Not as much as he believed in where he was going.
Right. So he did what God asked him to do. He believed that God would even raise the dead. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. And by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons in worship as he leaned on top of his staff. So all these examples by faith. Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. So all these things were done in faith. Faith, not blind faith, faith based on a promise from God. So when people ask us about the resurrection, about Jesus, and we say, well, we believe by faith, make sure they understand this is not just blind faith. This is faith based upon promises from the Old Testament. So this is an unfolding of God's truth based upon the Old Testament, not some isolated event that somebody created in the New Testament and rewrote some verses. This was based upon promises. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So now Moses, born into the family of the Pharaoh, could have said, a Jew building the pyramids, a slave Jew, or living here in the palace as a wealthy Egyptian.
Yeah, I have a lot of choices.
He chose to live with the Jews because he was a Jew. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. And that's kind of really profound there. And I think each of us, I know I have anyway, had to make that decision. Do I want to live with God, including being mistreated, being, whatever happens?
Ostracized.
Yeah. Or do I want to enjoy the pleasures of sin? So Moses had that choice as well. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. Now, what's interesting about that?
Christ wasn't there yet. He hadn't.
That's right.
Exactly, I was just going to say.
Christ wasn't
okay.
there yet. So what do you think he means by that?
He believed in the Old Testament promises.
Okay, he believed in the Old Testament promises. So what Moses was seeing was something in the future.
Right.
And somehow he was seeing there would be salvation. Salvation would come in some form. God was going to save us. He may not have had the picture of a particular Messiah in mind, or he probably couldn't have, but he knew there was a promise. And so that promise
Kept him motivated.
is Christ. And it kept him motivated.
But Bob, where did that information come from? Because wasn't he living in Pharaoh's palace? I mean, Pharaoh's daughter took him in,
Yeah.
raised him as her own. So he was living among Egyptians. So where did he even get any of this information?
From that he was a Jew?
Yeah.
From his mother, I believe, is how
Yes.
he found
So
out.
he stayed in contact with her?
She stayed in contact with him. She was his babysitter. Remember, she was his nanny.
That's right.
Right.
So she raised him, telling him the stories.
Okay. Got it.
Okay. I was being tested there, wasn't
Yes,
I?
you
Oh,
did. It was my only job today.
She
That was a good one, though. Yes. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. We know he saw God. Remember the burning bush? I think this is a reference to the burning bush there. That he saw God in the burning bush. He saw Christ in the burning bush. And by faith he kept the Passover and the application of blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. So another event of faith. And all these things could be said, these are works.
No.
But they're works of faith. They're obedience. Remember we said that last week. The difference is one is works out of obedience. Another one is a works of obedience. So when we obey God, it's not work. It's obedience. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned because they didn't have the faith. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And he says, and what more shall I say? I mean, he's gone on, repeating all these items of faith. I don't have time to tell about Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, about David and Samuel and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of the lions and quenched the fury of the flames and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. So he's going on here and saying, I could go on and on forever and tell you story after story of acts of faith from the Old Testament. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. These are the Old Testament, I believe he's referring to here. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. Remember who was sawed in two?
Isaiah?
Yeah. Yeah. It was Isaiah. And they went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. So this is here telling us what believers in faith did and what happened to them. So, we've got to ask ourselves the question of what is the reality of faith? I mean, look at the Old Testament, the examples of faith in the Old Testament. Even in the New Testament, examples of faith. So, why would we teach anything other than this? It's a reward in the future. Not a reward now, but a reward in the future. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. They got the promise, but they never received the promise, which was Christ. Since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. So, those are the examples. By note here, accordingly, Old Testament believers do indeed attain the promised perfection, but not apart from us. They, with us, belong to the many sons who, thanks to the pioneer of our salvation, are brought to glory. So, their fulfillment was something that was something future. And so, in a sense, so is ours. But we have more than they had, because we at least heard the message of the gospel, which is the promise fulfilled. And so that's the connection between faith and promise and fulfillment. They had faith, but they did, based on the promise, but they never received the fulfillment of the promise. We have that advantage is that we know what the promise was. We have faith that that was fulfillment. So for them it was forward looking, for us it's backward looking. We look at the promise as having been fulfilled. Okay, so anybody have any questions on that? Is there a different light? Did you see faith in a different light, or is this just what you've kind of heard before?
No, I think this makes a difference for me.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think this book's very powerful.
Yeah.
This book is very powerful.
Hebrews.
Yeah, yeah, it is very powerful. It's been underestimated and
Yes, I was
underrated.
gonna say, it's, you know, it's,
Yeah.